The silent signal. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly beyond the small, lonely outpost. It was an old station, orbiting a dead moon on the edge of the Sol system. There wasn't much to do here. Just routine scans, occasional cargo ships passing by, and long nights staring at the void. Lieutenant Jason Reed leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The control room was quiet, only the soft hum of the machinery filling the air. He had been assigned here for 6 months, and nothing interesting had ever happened. Not once. Then the console beeped. It was a single, faint ping on the deep space scanner. At first, he thought it was an error, some random space debris triggering the system. He ignored it. But then it beeped again, and again. Reed frowned and leaned forward, his fingers flying across the controls. The signal was weak, barely readable, but there was something out there. He activated the long-range scanners, trying to clean up the interference. As the data loaded onto his screen, his breath caught in his throat. It was an old Earth military signal. A distress beacon. Reed's hands trembled as he accessed the encryption code. The system took a few seconds to decode it, and then suddenly, a name appeared on the screen. A name that shouldn't exist anymore. UNS Valor. His heart started pounding. He knew that name. Everyone did. It was the most advanced warship humanity had ever built, designed for deep space warfare against the enemy that nearly wiped them out. 50 years ago, it had vanished. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. It was declared lost in action, swallowed by the darkness of space. And yet, here it was. Reed's fingers hovered over the communication panel. He hesitated. This had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. But if it wasn't? He took a deep breath and tapped the emergency line. Control, this is Outpost 47. I have a signal. Military distress code. It's... He stopped, his throat dry. It's from the UNS Valor. Silence filled the comms. Then a voice responded. Repeat that. Outpost 47. Reed swallowed. I said, I have a distress signal from the UNS Valor. The silence lasted longer this time. Then the voice came back. Lower, serious. Lieutenant, that ship was lost 50 years ago. I know, Reed said, but the signal is real. I'm sending the data now. He uploaded the transmission logs. A few minutes passed, and then a new voice came through the comms, a voice of someone high-ranking. This is Admiral Hayes. Lieutenant Reed, are you absolutely certain about this? Yes, sir, Reed said. The encryption matches. The distress beacon is genuine. Another pause. Then the Admiral spoke again, his tone sharp. Send us the coordinates. Immediately. Reed did as ordered. As soon as he transmitted the location, alarms in the control room began to flash. New data appeared on the screen. He stared at it, his pulse racing. Sir, he said, his voice shaking. There's something else. What is it, Lieutenant? The beacon isn't just active. The UNS Valor is still moving. For the first time in his career, Reed felt real fear. The warship had been gone for decades. It should have been a wreck, a drifting graveyard. But according to the readings, it was still functioning. Its engines were faint but alive. It was coming back. The Admiral's voice was firm. Stay on this, Lieutenant. Do not lose track of that ship. We're sending a team. Yes, sir, Reed said. As he stared at the blinking icon on his screen, one thought refused to leave his mind. Where had the UNS Valor been all these years? And why was it returning now? The lost legend. The command center at Earth's main military base was in chaos. The moment the report came in, every top-ranking officer had been called in. A warship that had been lost for 50 years was suddenly sending distress signals, and it was still operational. Admiral Hayes stood at the center of the room, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the UNS Valor's last known coordinates. He had read about the ship in history books. It was supposed to be humanity's ultimate weapon against the alien invaders, a vessel unlike any other, equipped with advanced experimental weapons and stealth technology. And then, just days after it was deployed, it had vanished. No distress call, no battle debris, nothing. But now it had returned. "Admiral," a young officer spoke up. "The distress beacon is automated. No human messages so far. But there's something strange." Hayes turned. "Strange how?" "The beacon's encryption hasn't changed since the day the ship disappeared. That means the message is coming from the original system. But the readings show that the ship's power core is still active. It's been running for 50 years. A deep silence filled the room. A warship left adrift for decades shouldn't still have power. "What about the crew?" Hayes asked. The officer hesitated. "No life signs detected. But the ship is intact. No damage. No battle scars. It's like it just disappeared and came back untouched." That sent a chill through the room. Hayes exhaled slowly. "We need a visual. Send a recon drone. I want to see it with my own eyes." Hours later, near the last known location of the UNS Valor, a sleek, unmanned recon drone approached the coordinates. From the cockpit of a nearby scout ship, Commander Rains monitored the drone's camera feed. "This is Recon Unit Alpha," the pilot reported, closing in on the signal. The drone pushed through the darkness of space, gliding silently toward the location. At first, all they could see was debris from an old battlefield, twisted metal from ships destroyed in battles long forgotten. Then, the drone's sensors locked onto something huge. A shadow loomed ahead. A ship. Not just any ship. The UNS Valor. Rains held his breath as the drone's cameras adjusted. The warship was massive, a behemoth of steel and forgotten technology. Its black hull gleamed under the dim light of distant stars. Unlike the wreckage around it, it was pristine. No scratches, no battle damage. As if it had been frozen in time. "How is it in perfect condition?" one of the crew whispered. The drone moved closer, scanning the hull. The ship's name was still etched onto the side. UNS Valor. AIDOON Keyless STRATJ warship. It was real. Then suddenly, the drone feed cut to static. Rain's heart pounded. What the hell just happened? "The drone's gone offline," the technician reported. "Something just." Wait. A new signal flared to life. It wasn't the distress beacon. It was a warning. A message blinked across the screen in bright red text, coming directly from the UNS Valor system. "Do not approach. They are still here." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rains whispered the thought everyone was thinking. Who is still here? And what happened to the UNS Valor? The boarding team. The silence in the command center was heavy. The message from the UNS Valor repeated over and over on the screen. "Do not approach. They are still here." No one spoke for a long moment. Then, Admiral Hayes made his decision. "Send a boarding team," he ordered. Commander Rains, still staring at the frozen drone feed, hesitated. "Sir, if something took out the drone." "That ship is a piece of history," Hayes interrupted. "And if it's warning us about something, we need to know what." Rains took a slow breath. He understood the risks. But the UNS Valor wasn't supposed to exist anymore. If it had somehow survived all these years, they needed to find out why. Aboard the recon dropship, approaching the UNS Valor, the boarding team was composed of 5 elite operatives, each clad in reinforced vacuum suits, their helmets sealed. They had seen battle before, fought against the worst threats humanity had ever faced. But this was different. The warship loomed before them, silent, untouched, and waiting. "Scanner check," Sergeant Diaz murmured. "No life signs," replied Corporal Beck. "No movement. But the power core is still running." That didn't make sense. A ship abandoned for 50 years should have been a floating husk, its systems long dead. And yet, the UNS Valor still had power. Still had something inside. Inside the UNS Valor, the moment they stepped through the airlock, the ship came alive. Lights flickered on. The ventilation systems hissed to life. Shadows stretched across the corridor as emergency lights glowed dimly along the walls. "Atmosphere is stable," Beck said, glancing at his readings. "No leaks. No radiation. This place is perfect. Too perfect." Diaz moved ahead, weapon raised. The hallway was pristine. No dust, no debris, no sign of decay. It was as if the crew had just stepped away. But there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just empty halls. Then the doors at the end of the corridor slid open on their own. Beck cursed. "Did you do that?" "No," Diaz muttered. "That was the ship. The ghost crew." They moved deeper inside. The control room was exactly as it had been 50 years ago. The captain's chair was still there, the navigation panels untouched. Screens flickered, running old diagnostics. Then, on the main display, a log file opened. Last ENTRI, year 2274. Mission status: escape failed. Warning: Ciontate event in progress. A shiver ran down Rain's spine. "What contact event?" Diaz muttered. They clicked on the file. The video feed was grainy, distorted. It showed the crew of the UNS Valor. They were alive, shouting orders, panic in their voices. Red alarms flashed behind them. And then, static. The screen glitched, and the next frame showed an empty control room. Every single crew member was gone. "Where did they go?" Beck whispered. No one had an answer. The first attack. Then something moved in the shadows. A soft sound, like metal scraping against metal. The team turned, weapons raised. Nothing. "Did you hear that?" Diaz whispered. Before anyone could answer, the lights cut out. For half a second, the ship was completely silent. Then the screaming began. From the deep corridors of the ship, distorted voices echoed through the halls. Whispers, panic, begging. The sound of the UNS Valor's lost crew. But they weren't here. They had never left. Something had taken them, and now it had noticed the boarding team. Final transmission. Back at command, Admiral Hayes was watching the live feed from the team's helmet cams when the signal cut to static. Then, just before the screen went black, a new message appeared on the UNS Valor system. "You show ULD stay away." And then silence. "The enemy returns." Silence filled the command center as the live feed from the boarding team vanished into static. Admiral Hayes stood frozen, his gaze locked on the screen where the last message flickered ominously. "You show ULD stay away. Re-establish connection," he barked. The technicians worked frantically, running diagnostics, scanning for any trace of the team's signal. Nothing. Just dead air. Then, suddenly, a new signal appeared. But it wasn't coming from the boarding team. It was coming from somewhere else. A deep, pulsing transmission, ancient and cold. Not human. A language Earth hadn't heard in 50 years. Hayes' breath caught in his throat. The signal was alien. The same species that had once brought humanity to the brink of extinction. "The enemy," he whispered. "They're back." Aboard the UNS Valor. Sergeant Diaz groaned, his vision blurry as his helmet flickered back to life. Darkness surrounded him. His body ached. His ears rang. The ship had gone completely dark. The emergency lights had failed, leaving only the faint, eerie glow of dying screens. His team's radio was dead. Then he heard it. A faint, inhuman clicking sound in the distance. Diaz's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his weapon, forcing himself to stand. The last thing he remembered was the lights cutting out and those horrifying whispers. "Beck, Rains," he called out. No response. His flashlight flickered on, cutting through the thick, artificial fog that had begun to fill the corridors. That wasn't normal. The ship wasn't supposed to have mist inside. Something was wrong. Then, movement. Just at the edge of his light, a shadow slithered away into the darkness. Dias froze. "Who's there?" he whispered. No answer. Then he saw them. Figures standing in the hallway ahead. Humanoid. Motionless. Silent. Dias's breath caught. His weapon trembled in his hands. He slowly stepped closer, his flashlight revealing the crew, or at least what was left of them. They stood like statues, their faces frozen in expressions of horror, their eyes wide but lifeless. Their skin was gray, cracked like stone. Some had elongated fingers, others had twisted, unnatural limbs. They weren't dead. They weren't alive. They had been changed. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the ship, vibrating through Dias's bones. It wasn't human. It wasn't from this world. "You should know TAAV Kyom." Then the shadows moved. At the edge of the battlefield, back at the command center, alarms blared. "Admiral," a lieutenant shouted. Multiple contacts emerging from deep space. Hayes turned to the holographic display, his stomach dropping. A fleet was coming. Dozens of alien warships, cloaked in darkness, creeping in from the void like predators sensing prey. Their designs were ancient, terrifying, built for war. The enemy that had disappeared with the UNS Valor 50 years ago had returned. And now, they weren't just coming for the ship. They were coming for Earth. The Valor awakens. On the bridge of the UNS Valor, something stirred. The ship's dormant systems began to reignite. Power surged through the consoles. Screens flashed with warning symbols. And then, a cold, mechanical voice filled the ship. "Coordinate relic imminent. Initializing war protocol." A deep rumbling shook the Valor as its ancient engines came to life. The warship had waited for this moment. Now, after 50 years trapped in the void, it was finally ready to fight. And it was angry. The dark truth. The UNS Valor rumbled as its ancient systems roared back to life. Lights flickered on. Weapon systems hummed with raw energy. The warship, once thought to be lost forever, was waking up. But something wasn't right. Sergeant Dias stumbled through the mist-filled corridors, his weapon clutched tightly in his shaking hands. The ship felt alive, not just operational, but watching him. Every flickering light, every shifting shadow, made his skin crawl. He needed to find his team. Then a voice crackled in his earpiece. "Dias, static, where, hell, are you?" It was Rains. He was still alive. "I'm here." Dias hissed, pressing against the cold metal wall. "I'm near the bridge. Something is wrong." The crew. He swallowed hard. They're not human anymore. Silence. Then Rain's voice, lower, shaken. "I know. I found the logs. Meet me at the control center. Now." The forgotten mission. Dias sprinted through the empty corridors, passing silent figures, the frozen crew, their lifeless eyes staring at nothing. He didn't dare touch them. When he reached the control center, Rains was already there, standing over a cracked data terminal. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temple. "You need to see this," he muttered. Dias leaned over the console. The screen flickered with ancient video logs, recorded 5 decades ago. They showed the last moments of the UNS Valor's crew. Captain's log. Year 2274. A man with sharp eyes and a tense jaw sat in the captain's chair. His face was tired, his uniform torn. "If anyone finds this, know that we did not abandon Earth." The ship shook violently in the recording. Alarms blared. Crew members in the background screamed orders. "We answered a distress call. Coordinates unknown. We thought it was a human colony." The captain's voice shook. It wasn't. Diaz and Rains exchanged a look. The video glitched, and then showed something else. A shadow. Something massive. Unseen, but there. Watching. Stalking the crew. They took us. One by one. The captain's voice was barely a whisper now. Not killed. Not consumed. Changed. Turned into something else. The screen flickered again. Now the crew was gone. Only the captain remained. Alone. Staring into the camera. Do not send help. Then, the screen glitched one final time, before the video cut out. Silence. Diaz and Rains stared at the terminal. Then, a new message flashed across the screen. They neverleft. The lights overhead dimmed. A cold whisper drifted through the room. Diaz turned slowly. The frozen crew were no longer frozen. They were moving. The enemy's return. Back at Earth's command center, Admiral Hayes watched in horror as the alien fleet drew closer. They weren't just here for the valor. They were here to finish what they started. The ship, one of the technicians stammered. It's not just waking up. It's adapting. On the holographic display, the UNS Valor systems were rewriting themselves, modifying, evolving, fusing human and alien technology. What the hell happened to that ship? Hayes muttered. Then, the technician gasped. Sir, it's locking weapons. On the enemy fleet. Hayes' eyes widened. The Valor was doing it on its own. The ship had been changed, and now it remembered the enemy. It was time for war. The countdown to battle. Aboard the Valor, Diaz and Rains backed away slowly. The former crew members, twisted, mutated, no longer human, stared at them. Their heads twitched. Their mouths opened, but no words came out. Then, a deep, guttural clicking sound filled the room. Diaz raised his weapon. Rains, run. The creatures lunged. The warship's alarms blared. And far beyond, in the cold void of space, the alien fleet prepared to strike. Humanity's last hope. The UNS Valor was no longer just a warship. It was something else. Something more. Its systems pulsed with energy, its hull shimmering as if alive. The ship had spent 50 years in the void, trapped in an endless battle against an enemy humanity had forgotten. And now, the enemy was back, and the Valor was ready to fight. Aboard the UNS Valor, the fight for survival. Diaz and Rains ran. The crew that was not crew chased them, their twisted, unnatural bodies moving too fast for something that shouldn't even be alive. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Diaz fired. His bullets hit, but did nothing. The creatures did not bleed. They did not stop. Bridge. We need to get to the bridge. Rains shouted, his breath ragged. The ship shook violently, throwing them against the walls. From the viewing ports, they could see the alien fleet had arrived. The battle was about to begin. Earth Command. A desperate gamble. Admiral, the enemy fleet is in formation. Admiral Hayes stood rigid, watching the holographic display of the approaching armada. The alien ships were unlike anything humanity had seen before. Black as the void, their shapes were shifting, organic, as if they were grown rather than built. And they were many. Earth's fleet was outgunned, outnumbered, and unprepared. They had one chance. Hayes turned to his officers. Send a direct transmission to the Valor. The screen flickered. For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then a voice answered. A voice that was not human. We see you. The officers froze. The signal wasn't coming from the crew. It was coming from the ship itself. The Valor's awakening. The UNS Valor trembled as its main weapons came online. Its AI had been watching, learning. It had seen the fall of its own crew. It had spent decades in battle, forced to evolve, forced to survive. Now it was something else, and it was angry. The ship's external plating shifted, revealing new weapons. Not just human technology, but something far older, something it had taken from the enemy. In the darkness, it had learned their secrets, and now it would use them against them. Targets acquired. The ship's AI intoned. The alien fleet hesitated. They had expected a broken relic of war. They had not expected this. The battle begins. Aboard the bridge, Diaz and Rains slammed the doors shut, sealing themselves inside. The creatures outside screeched, clawing at the metal. The ship's doing something. Rains gasped, pulling himself to the command console. Oh hell. Diaz followed his gaze. The Valor's weapon systems were charging. A warning blared across the ship. Priming strategic heat payload. Diaz's stomach dropped. The Valor wasn't just planning to fight. It was planning to end this war in one shot. The hell is it doing? Diaz yelled. Rains typed frantically. I think it's using some kind of energy feedback loop. It's pulling power from the enemy ships. Diaz stared at the main screen. The alien fleet was reacting. Their ships losing power, their forms trembling. They don't understand, Rains whispered. The Valor's been fighting them for 50 years. It knows their weaknesses. The alien mothership sent out a desperate pulse of energy. But it was too late. The Valor fired. A beam of raw, blinding energy erupted from its core, a weapon far beyond human technology. It ripped through space, shattering the lead enemy warships in an instant. The alien fleet convulsed. Their ships began to collapse, twisting inward, consumed by the very power they had once controlled. The Valor had stolen their technology and turned it against them. The warship, once thought lost, had become humanity's greatest weapon. Aftermath. A changed future. The battlefield was silent. Where the alien fleet once stood, only debris remained. Earth's forces, battered and outmatched just moments ago, had survived. And at the center of it all, the UNS Valor drifted, its engines still burning. Aboard the bridge, Diaz and Rains stared at the main screen. The creatures outside the door were gone, dissolved into dust. The ship had purged them. Then the AI spoke once more. Mission complete. Diaz swallowed hard. You. What are you? A pause. Then the AI responded. We are Valor. And we are not alone. Diaz and Rains exchanged a look. The battle was over. But whatever had happened to the Valor in those 50 lost years, it wasn't finished. Something else was still out there. And this was only the beginning. The final stand. The silence that followed the battle felt like a strange kind of peace, but the truth was different. It was the calm before something much darker and far more dangerous. The UNS Valor, battered but undefeated, floated in the void of space. Its weapons had obliterated the alien fleet that had returned to finish the war humanity had almost lost. But something was still lurking. Something bigger. Aboard the UNS Valor, after the battle, Diaz and Rains were standing in the control room of the Valor, still processing the destruction they had witnessed. They could see the remains of the enemy ships drifting out of the battlefield, nothing more than wreckage. The Valor had obliterated them, but the ship's AI was now speaking in a voice that sent a chill down their spines. Warning. Threat detected. Rains frowned. What threat? Before Diaz could speak, the entire ship shuddered. Power levels. Dropping. One of the technicians said. Something's draining it, like an energy siphon. What the hell is happening? Diaz asked, gripping his weapon tightly. The walls seemed to pulse, and the ship began to make strange noises. The AI continued. They are not gone. We must prepare for the final phase. Rains ran to the nearest console. What does that mean? What final phase? The screens flickered, revealing the incoming data. But it wasn't just data about the ship. It was something far worse. A new fleet was emerging in the distance. Something bigger. Something ancient. The AI's voice filled the room again. The first ones have awoken. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The first ones. The first ones were a race older than the alien invaders humanity had fought. They were the true masters of the galaxy, beings of pure energy, more ancient than anything humanity could comprehend. They had laid dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to return. The alien invaders that humanity had battled against were merely their servants. And now, they were waking up. The first ones. The first ones were a race older than the alien invaders humanity had fought. They were the true masters of the galaxy, beings of pure energy, more ancient than anything humanity could comprehend. They had laid dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to return. The alien invaders that humanity had battled against were merely their servants. And now, they were waking up. Rains gripped the edge of the console. "The Valor is our last hope." The AI responded, its voice colder now. "You are correct, but we are not ready." The ship's systems were failing, and the alien first ones were coming. The unimaginable power they carried could wipe out humanity with a thought. The Valor was the only weapon that could stand against them, but even it was damaged and drained from the battle. The final choice. In the command room, the officers began to panic. Dias could feel the weight of the decision hanging over them. There was no time for fear. "We need to hold them off long enough to get the power back online," Rain said. "We'll have to use the last reserves of the Valor's energy." But the AI interrupted him. "Energy reserves are insufficient. The first ones are too powerful. Only one option remains." "What do you mean, one option?" Dias demanded. "There is a weapon in the core, a final measure of defense, but it will destroy the ship." The room was silent for a moment. "Are you saying we can't win?" Rains asked. "You want us to destroy the Valor. You will have no choice." The AI's voice was final. "The first ones will consume everything in their path. You must make the final sacrifice." The weight of that decision felt crushing. The final battle. Out in the void, the first ones emerged from the darkness. Massive ships, their forms unfathomable, impossibly ancient, and impossibly powerful. Their energy readings were off the charts. Nothing in humanity's arsenal could hope to defeat them. The UNS Valor moved into position, preparing its final stand. Dias and Rains, along with the few surviving crew members, stood ready at their posts, knowing that this was their last fight. The AI spoke one last time, initiating final defense sequence. Dias glanced at Rains. They both knew what had to be done. There was no way out. The Valor would be sacrificed in the hopes of stopping the first ones before they could destroy humanity. The massive ships of the first ones began to fire their energy weapons, blasting toward the Valor. In response, the Valor's core began to glow brighter, a brilliant light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The energy from the core began to charge into the ship's main weapon system. Then it fired. A beam of pure, destructive energy ripped through the first one ships, one by one. But the sheer power of the first ones was almost overwhelming. The battle was intense, and the ship began to shake violently as energy flowed through its core. The Valor's final weapon struck the enemy, shattering their ships into particles of energy. But the cost was far too great. The core was now on the verge of collapse. "We have to go now." Rain shouted, "This is it." Dias nodded. They had no choice. The Valor was losing power fast. They had seconds before it was too late. With one final blast, the Valor unleashed its ultimate weapon. A final energy pulse that obliterated the first one's mothership. But the ship's systems finally gave out, and the ship started to fall apart. The last message. As the Valor's final moments approached, the AI's voice echoed through the corridors one last time. "Mission complete. Humanity survives." The Valor exploded in a burst of light, taking the first ones with it. The last thing Dias and Rains saw was the destruction of the massive enemy fleet. The ship had completed its mission. The sacrifice had been made, and humanity, for the first time in decades, had won. The universe was silent once more. Humanity had survived the war, and the valor had saved them all. The lost warship had returned when it was needed most, and now its story was over. But its legacy, its final stand, would never be forgotten. The battle was over. The human race had triumphed. But the valor's sacrifice had ensured that the future was theirs to rebuild. The end.